a pleasure to be with you all today, and with my colleague, Dr. Rick Garlick. Can you get on screen, Rick? Is
Yep,
that
I'm here and would
there you go.
like to give my own welcome to the audience today, and think we've got some very important things to talk about. You know, Bob, one of the questions that came in, we asked people to give us some questions before the webinar starts, and one of the questions that came in is, what is the number one question that people ask you? And what's interesting about it is that the question used to be, how can I better engage employees for the purpose of driving my customer satisfaction scores? That was probably 9 times out of 10 when I would do employee engagement work with companies. That was the number one question. That question, however, has now been replaced by the question, how do I retain my employees? How do I retain my best talent and attract top talent when it seems like it's so hard to do these days? And that's really why we're tackling this webinar today.
Yes, I agree completely, and that's actually number one, according to Human Resource Executive magazine, number one need in companies today for this whole year in the U.S. is the topic of retention. How do I hold on to employees? We're in a severe shortage of skilled labor, even without the pandemic and all the challenges of that. We already had a shortage of people given the demographics, and increasingly not just people, but people with the skills that you need. So we're at a record level of employment. There's currently 11 million jobs that are open. So it's we have the people. It's having the people that have the skills that you need for your job. And what we're going to talk about is whoever it is you're trying to keep, whether it's frontline people or talent or high potentials or technical employees. The concepts we're going to share can be applied for any of those groups. And ideally, you would start doing things in the organization that would help to attract and hold on to everyone. So, with that note, let's start with a quote here that Sir Richard Branson: "If you take care of your people, you'll take care of your business." Now, again, very simple, but there's a lot of power to this thought that people. I find. I worked with Ken Blanchard, who wrote The 1 Minute Manager for a decade, and he said management is what you do with people, not what you do to them. So in talking about human resources, it's sometimes easy to get detached and say, well, we're going to do these programs, and you're doing it looking at the budget items and implications, and you end up with a corporate program that's driven by HR, and we've got a much more personal approach. If you want to hold on to the employees you have, if you make them feel valued systematically on the part of your leadership, that means every leader, every manager in their sphere of influence, that they're doing the things that connect their people more strongly to them and to the group and to the organization, then the ripple effect of a mass of your leaders doing that will change the environment and the culture of the organization. So,
yeah, and Bob, I think it's really interesting to note that we live in a service-driven economy. So when we lived in a manufacturing-driven economy, people could walk out the door and you could get new people to come in and push the buttons, right? Now, when people leave organizations, they take that intellectual capital with them out the door. And SHRM estimates that it's 6 to 9 months of a person's salary to replace that employee. So some of the analysis that we've been doing at WorkProud with Michael has shown that if you can cut the turnover rate by, say, 20%, you literally can save the company millions of dollars in turnover costs.
Yes, and that's just out of the chute if you do the right things, which we're going to get into, and then if you stick on that path, it'll get even better. So that's what our experience is, that's what our research is, and that's what we're going to talk about. What does that look like in the specifics? So let's start with, we're talking about retention. Well, why do people leave? This is recent research from McKinsey, consulting firm, and they're done in here the tail end of the pandemic last couple of years. And number one reason they found was the lack of career development advancement. So and I think there's a lot here in this topic. It's not just a promotion, it's helping people uh, develop. So it could be a learning experience, it could be a new assignment, it could be a choice of assignments, it could be on a task force in addition to their job. There's a lot of gradations in career development that I think companies don't take advantage of, that don't systematically do that. Ideally, you can get down to career paths. And I actually, we were talking about this the other day, Rick, that I think that for when people enter your company in the first day of their job with their manager, I think the onus is on the manager to say, hey, get a cup of coffee, and of all the places you could have worked in our community, what was it about working here that most excited you?
Yeah, and
And
I
from
think
the
I think this
get-go, find out what their motivation is, and where do they want to be, what do they hope to learn, where do they hope to go, where do they want to be 5 years from now. That type of thing is opening ante, because if you make this more of a career than a job, people will be sticking around, and it starts with the first conversation. I cut you off there, Rick.
No, I was going to say that, one of the data points that we found from our WorkProud study, we ask a question: I'd be very happy to spend the rest of my career with my present company. And people ask the question, well, who wants to spend the rest of their career with one company? Well, a lot of people. It's about really, if the conditions are right, it can be up to half the people that we survey, right?
Yeah,
So it's one of these things, not necessarily in the same job,
right.
but this becomes really important, I think, particularly for young people. We always talk about that millennial group of employees, the
Millennial,
younger
Gen Z, yes.
Gen Z, Gen Y. And, my experience has been when I've supervised those people, they really like to be running the company yesterday when they first come in. And, it's one of those things that if you give them developmental opportunities, this becomes particularly important for those young workers, giving them opportunities to grow. And Bob, you mentioned some of the things, giving them an opportunity to attend conferences, to be better trained, to have lunch with the boss or the manager, to be able to talk about their career path and things that they might be doing,
Yes.
shadowing people, learning new job roles, all those sorts of things represent developmental opportunities without necessarily promoting people into a position that they may not be ready for or skilled for.
Let me share the rest of this list for just again from McKinsey. Inadequate compensation. Now, on any list I've ever seen about retention, money's on the list, and money's important to people, and we got to pay our bills. So there's no doubt about that. It's not just money though. And I really find that it's the top of the list. It's on the list somewhere. And again, it's not just more money. What people want is fair compensation. So if it's you take any number, it's relative, to where the peers are making, where their friends are making, and they have to feel the times when compensation is critical to focus on is if you're not paying a competitive wage, that they can go somewhere else, or if they can go at the low level, you're competing with McDonald's, for a minimum wage type job. But for most professionals, once they're able to pay their bills and live a standard of living to which they're accustomed, then their focus moves to other things than money. Being part of the team, being part of something larger than themselves, being valued by their management and senior management. Those are the things that come up. So once you're and now if you're younger, you got student loans you're paying. That's going to be more prominent in your focus. But even then, it's like after the first few years, people's focus goes elsewhere. So we could talk about more about money as well, but I tend to find that this is a knee-jerk reaction that that we're having a hard time hiring people is this bump wages, for that category. And it's a short-term solution, because if you react to that and then we're having more problems, it's bump it again. And there's only so much money you're going to have in the pot to spread around. So you need and have to focus on other things that are important.
Well,
And most of those don't cost any money, is my finding.
one of
Go
the
ahead.
things I was going to say, Bob, and you and I have talked about this, that when you look at the compensation issue, compensation really is a form of recognition for the value that an employee creates for a company, right? So when we start a job, we always know what we're getting paid. I mean, we agree to a salary before we even walk in the door. Where compensation becomes a sticking point is when we don't feel like we're being paid fairly for the value we create for the company. So we look at our peers who, maybe doing more or less than we are, and we know what they're getting paid. We know what people in other companies are being paid. So it really is a form of recognition. Now, again, people will sacrifice money for meaningful work, for a culture they enjoy, all those sorts of things. And so I think as we talk about these things, it's really critical to think about compensation as a form of recognition, and not so much the dollar figures involved, but what those dollars signify for, the people who are receiving, what they consider to be substandard wages.
Other items that came up: uncaring, uninspiring leaders. That it's hard to work for someone you don't feel is on your side. And again, it gets back to the real bond in all this is from my perspective, is the individual manager and their sphere of influence. What and for me, uncaring, uninspiring leaders, to fix that, it's starting with with recognition, thanking people, noticing them, calling that out in systematic ways. And so this is a strong theme of our mutual experience, is that you've got to have people feel valued. You can't just hope they feel valued, or you can't assume that because we're paying them well, then that's good enough. They have to, it's a mutually exclusive. You can be paid well. I've talked to a lot of people that were paid well and didn't feel valued, and they didn't care. Maybe in the short term it's like combat pay, but in the long term, that's not going to be the role for them, because they need more than just a good salary to be excited about working in your company, especially for the long term. And the younger generation, even when they start, they got one foot out the door. They get pinged if someone looks at their resume. So the whole information explosion and the access to information, anyone can look up to see what their job is worth on Google and get comparisons, vary that by where you're living. And so people have access and that's why it's got to be transparent. And at least in California, they're moving towards having transparency in all salaries. So we're gonna see how that goes. But to come back to the point, how you're treated by your manager and the considerations and having them on your side is critical. They talked about lack of meaningful work, and all these other traits are kind of, in my mind, similar. They're intangible. They seem, how do you get your arms around this? It's all through the manager and in their sphere of influence. Unsustainable work expectations, unreliable, unsupportive colleagues, lack of work flexibility, which is a bigger one now that people have been exposed to flexibility as everyone pivoted to work from home during the pandemic. For professional employees, at least, they want to hold on to that. And so, and now if their company is expecting they come back to work, full time, 4 or 5 days a week, maybe I'll just look around, find a company where I don't have to come into work. And there's a lot of hiring in that venue. Right now, half of all employees say their job could be done completely from home. Again, tend to be the more professional positions, not the essential workers, the frontline customer-facing workers. So this is, I think, is going to be on the list forever. Lack of support for health and well-being, and the list goes on similar things. So my point, I look at this research, is that yeah, money's there, but the other things that are important to people, that would keep them in the job, are all tend to be more behavioral. And if we can get that going in the part of their leadership, specifically their manager, and then their peer group, and get some upper managers in there. And now you're starting to shape a culture in a place where people want to stay.
Well,
Um,
Bob, let's talk a little bit about some of the work you and I did on this whole notion of pride in the workplace.
Absolutely,
So
it ties right
go,
in.
go back to the other list just for a second.
Okay,
So we looked at two things. We looked at the pride that people have in the work that they do. So lack of meaningful work, certainly ties into that. I have to feel that what I'm doing is important, that it's worth getting up and spending my day doing. I feel like I'm doing something bigger. But the other piece is pride in my company, that I'm proud of the place that I work. It's got a good culture. Diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives play a part of this corporate social responsibility, that the company that I work for is a place that I'm proud to be. Now, I can be proud of my work that I do, but then I can take that somewhere else. So the thing that we see is most connected to people staying at their job is this pride that people have in their company. Now, this is a direct result for the work that you and I did, Bob.
right.
And we looked at people with varying levels of company pride. And what's interesting out of our
Basically,
entire,
high pride and low pride were the
yeah, and well, let me describe this. So we've got 1,000 people that we looked at, full-time employees. And what was interesting is we bucketed them in three categories, and they bucketed themselves almost into one third, one third, one third. We had high pride, low pride, and then we had this group in the middle that had some pride, but not particularly a lot. We see the impact in the extreme. So we take that high pride group and we find that 48%, almost half of the people who have that high company pride, strongly agreed. That is, they gave the most positive affirmative response to the statement. Even if I were offered significantly more money, I would still want to stay at my current company. Now that gets back to the compensation issue versus 2%. And I'm not convinced that 2% aren't just people who check the wrong box in the survey. Basically it's like half the people to none of the people. And it's a factor of 24 times, retaining people who have strong pride in their company versus people that have no pride in their company.
Just a personal example on that, Rick. I'm married to a computer scientist, and she's very skilled and very valued where she works. And just a couple months ago, she got a high tech computer type person, and she got a call from a recruiter who had actually put her in previous jobs and said, "I found the perfect job for you, and you're not gonna believe this. It pays $100,000 more than you're currently making."
Hmm.
And my wife, she didn't consult with me on this, by the way. My wife said, "No, thanks. I'm happy where I am. They value me here. I love my work. I don't want to risk changing any of that." So she passed on $100,000 job promotion because she was strongly connected with her current employer and the leadership of that, starting with her boss, who has a weekly one-on-one with her, and starts it all with a broad question. And I remember one recently was, how what do you most value in your contribution that you make? And they're constantly coming back to the theme of the job that she's doing, the impact it's having, who she's helping, and she loves it. Doesn't want to be anyplace else.
Great example, Bob. And here's another data point before we move on. And we could obviously talk about a lot of these, but that question, I would be very happy to spend the rest of my career with my present company. People ask, well, how many people want to stay at the same company for their entire career? 71% of that group that had high pride strongly agreed. That is, out of a 5-point scale, they gave the 5 response to this question versus only 5% in the low pride group. So that whole notion of driving company pride, and again, we talk about culture, recognition, all these things that are critical to driving that pride, but it's an amazing statistic.
Yes, I agree. And I want to give just a quick case study here on the topic of retention, because I deal with corporations, and the big windup and the big impact on the budget, and we're going to do this big program, and sometimes that's warranted, sometimes it makes sense, but sometimes it's just let's start with common sense. The best business practices are often common sense. And there's a lot of things that are common sense that aren't commonly done. Voltaire in 1640 said common sense is not very common. I think on some things that continues, and we have our research, our background, our careers have been focused on what is often common sense strategies that have impact. So in this organization, Hartford Hospital, they just to get our arms around one simple approach here that worked for this company, the head of nurse retention wanted to focus specifically on first year nurses. So in any hospital, half the employees are nurses. They're really hard to get, they're hard to hold on to. And so she wanted to focus first on just the people who've been here the first year, which is a very high turnover time. About 50% of nurses turnover, if not more, in the first year alone. So how can we get our arms around that was her focus. She did three things only. And she said, okay, we're going to start giving people a welcome letter within 30 days of starting with the organization. Now you could say, well, why didn't they do that the first day? Why didn't they do that? Well, they're not doing it at all. So they're gonna start doing something they're not doing to see if that has an impact on this, and that's what they did. So by your 30th day, you got a welcome letter to the hospital. Secondly, at 60 days, if they were still there, and a lot of them already left at this point, again, they're trying to get their arms around this. They did a one-page Survey Monkey questionnaire to them that said, hey, how's it going? Is there anything that we could do to help your orientation to the organization? At 60 days, a one-page survey. That's all he did. And then at 90 days, if people were still there, they got them together in a meeting with the VP of nursing to go over the Survey Monkey questions. And they had, and this was the only cost other than some behavior and time, they brought in some muffins and some balloons to have this discussion. And they found by just doing these three things only, that they looked at the impact on nurse retention of first-year nurses, and they found that it improved 20%. And that they calculated the cost of that, because they were able to figure out what's the cost to replace a nurse and the time and the hiring and whatnot, getting them up to speed. And they conservatively did that. And they conclude from this experiment that they were able to save $1.5 million in just the first year. And so bingo, now they're in the game now. And they found that if they went back to the Survey Monkey questions and took the top one and actually fixed that thing, maybe someone said it was hard to find the right person to ask a question to. Well, let's get better at doing that. Then retention will even up more for first year nurses. And on their journey they went, and then now we could expand it to all nurses. Maybe we can expand to other categories in the hospital. This is, to me, a very valid approach to say you got to start with where you're at and systematically try things and get better. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say that when you showed this to me, Bob, and you and I talked about this, my first reaction is, wow, this is a pretty minimal effort to have that kind of impact. Now, we talked about the fact that anybody who's taken an organizational psych class has probably heard about the Hawthorne studies that were done in the 1930, the electric company in Hawthorne, Indiana, where just simply paying attention to employees and giving them, some degree of concern bumped up productivity significantly.
Yes, and by the way, just for those that aren't familiar with that they were looking for the variables that most impacted productivity. So they go, well, this turn the lights up and see if that helps, and it did. Wow, that's kind of interesting. Let's turn the lights down, see what impact that has. And of course, they thought, well, then productivity does go down. They turned the lights down, and productivity still went up. And then they did the same thing with heat. And now, no matter what they did, people were more and more productive. And they go, what's going on here? And what they learned when they stepped back from it is that people were excited about being a focus of attention, and a special study going on, and they were in it, and management's looking. So no matter what you're going to do, we're going to show that we're committed. And it was a psychological element that really impacted it.
So what we'd agree, however, is that probably had a short-term bump, as this program did as well. And this isn't all you should do, but this is a really good first step.
And to get you in the game. So what you should do, no matter what, and they already had this baseline. You got to start with a clear foundation of where we are on this topic of retention. So what exactly is? And I work with companies that go, well, our retention, no, we're in retail, so whatever the going rate for turnover in retail is, that's probably what ours is. It's like, well, that's kind of a fuzzy start. This could more exacting. What is your turnover for your facility or for your organization, for your division, whatever that is, and was it, and get specific, and from our perspective, again, because we're dealing with a mental construct, if you will, motivation from the employee perspective. We got to get in their head and find out what is important to them, what do they want, and how do they want to be recognized. So this can be from an annual survey or a biannual survey. It could be a pulse survey. You can supplement that with focus groups, stay and exit interviews. There's a lot of places that you can get this information, and but you need to have that as a starting point, because then you can measure when you try something, you can see if it has an impact on that. And now you're on the right track. So this is a fundamental approach that you need to come up with. And now most companies, they do a survey or whatnot. And a lot of times, and Rick and I do a lot of this, we help companies get their arms around this. A lot of times we find out, know about you, Rick, but when I find working with companies that they often think that they have the answers to questions they haven't asked. So typically the companies say, well, oh yeah, we know what's important to our employees. We know how they want to be recognized. They want more money, they want promotions, they want better benefits. And, oh, that's what they said? No, but that's where we're spending all our budget, so that must be important to them.
Well,
Well,
and
this be easy. Let's just check that and confirm it, because when you do that, often it's not. Other things are more important to the employee than what the company thinks. So this stops feeling that we know why, and actually get to the source and ask people. And so if you have a survey, it's got to be asking the right questions. And sometimes maybe there's just one question: do I feel valued working here? And what can you really do with that answer? If you build that out and have a snapshot of different questions, now you can create a factor that you can tie to your efforts. Go ahead.
And Bob, I just want to dwell on this for just a second, because I think this is so critical, that so many companies, they'll spend millions of dollars in both employee surveys, incentive programs, all these sorts of things, only to find out that satisfaction with recognition is one of the lower rated items. And it's maddening to these companies. And the reason is because a lot of times these recognition programs are put in place by people who implement programs that they themselves might find motivating, without necessarily considering the impact on the employees that they're trying to influence.
Got to go to the source.
Well, we know that different people, just like we do segmentation studies and consumer research, we know different people like to be recognized in different ways. Like, for example, we talked about those younger employees, things like, tangible gift cards and points and those sorts of things.
Experiences, time with the boss.
Have more impact on those younger folks than, like people who are Gen X and boomers. They're more concerned about time with their family and flexibility and days off. So it's really critical to make sure, to emphasize the point you're making, to make sure that we're asking people how they want to be recognized, and make sure that there's some flexibility and some choice and some options that are involved.
Not one size fits all. Exactly.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
In fact, I remember one of the research studies you did, Rick, that you found out the organization you're studying, you found out 8% of the employees, what they wanted as a form of recognition was more responsibility.
Yeah.
And again, it varies for any of us in our own career, in our own life, our motivators as we go through our career. And you gave a great example. It's just, in general, it will shift from when you're younger, and the needs you have will shift over as you become older, and you get a more seasoned employee. A younger employee might want more time with the boss, the leading authority figure in their work life. You get to a more seasoned employee who's very good at their job, and they want less time with the boss. Trust I know what I'm doing. Keep out of my
Well,
hair.
and imagine like the example that you just used, Bob, that my study did show that the way that you reward some employees is give them more work, give them more responsibility because they want an opportunity to develop themselves. For most people, giving people more work and more responsibility is the last thing they want. They don't want that as a source of recognition. So it's really important to recognize people in the ways that they think is motivating, not the way that you think, or else it can actually backfire and be demotivating. And by the way, let's give a shout out to Selena Gomez for posing for this picture in the slide.
so so this measurement is important because now we have a baseline. As we try different things, we can see if there's an impact on that foundation, that measurement. And so you can't do it's important to have a measurement, but then you've got to track it and have along the way. And so, if you can't measure it, or if you choose not to measure it for whatever reason, and a lot of people pass on this topic because they go, yeah, recognition, that's kind of intangible, and how do you really track that and stuff, and then, or these other things, how do you track conversations a manager has with their employees. And so it just becomes all intangible. We can't impact that. When no, actually you can impact that. You will not impact it if you don't try, but you've got to wade in there with the form of measure. And one of those things that we find on recognition, especially today, with advances in recognition, that you got to have a platform. You've got to have and ideally that's a platform that is mobile friendly, because everyone's got one of these in their pocket. And if you want to tag into being in their presence, in their frame of mind, where their head's at, you could do it with this. And so having that access then enables you to monitor and track some of these intangible behaviors that we're advocating are so important, starting with recognition. If you have a platform that can capture when people are recognized, publicly or privately, who's doing it, who's not, well, that's important. And then who's getting it, who's not. That's important as well. So now all of a sudden, if we get that, mix that in with the baseline, we could say, well, we can correlate the people that are being recognized with their performance, with their retention. And as we've done that, Rick, we see some big results from minimal efforts that are overlooked by companies, because they, well, what possible difference can that make if people start thanking people for doing a good job, or start having career discussions, or allowing them to once a quarter have a skip level meeting with their manager's manager, talk about their career. What possible difference could that make? And we're saying a lot of difference, especially if you do it systematically, not piecemeal. But you come back to it and you build on it. Now you're in the game and you're headed the right direction, as opposed to just say, what can you do?
Yeah, and I don't want to take up time in this webinar because we want to wrap it up, but I recommend anybody to read the white paper that we just recently did on recognition and turnover. We were able to capture the actual amount of recognition given through the platform and tie that to turnover, and then monetize those cost differences between people that got a lot of recognition and people who got little or no recognition. And again, it's staggering numbers. It's staggering dollars that people save in turnover costs just simply by effectively using a recognition platform.
And it comes back to the interactions between the leadership and the employees. And so fundamental, important interactions. And that really takes us to the role of the manager in retaining employees. And it's critical, that the manager is the most important relationship in the workplace. Our boss, the person does our review, that controls our raise, that gives us our self of confidence in the job we're doing, that makes us want to be there tomorrow and come in tomorrow, or not. If you're working for a jerk, most people leave a job because of their manager. They may go to work because it's an exciting opportunity, but they always leave because their manager's a jerk. They're not doing the things that we know that employees want.
People don't leave jobs, they leave managers. That's a famous saying, right?
Exactly. So again, I already mentioned that. So in this relationship between the employee and their manager, you got to take time to get to know them, to find out what's important to them, how they want to be recognized, where they want to be in the future, where they hope to learn in this job, how can I roll up my sleeves when necessary and help you? What questions can I answer for you? You got to be a coach. for every leader, you got to be a coach. And if you're managing people, you might have other projects and be a working manager. But if you're managing people on top of the list, you gotta look out for them. You got to connect with them. You got to consistently come back with different behaviors that we're going to share. And so in your company, you've got to set expectations for the role of your managers explicitly. So it's not if you happen to be in a good mood and you might do some of this stuff. It's like, if you work for our organization, you're expected to do these things to support our core values, to tie recognition to performance that matters along our strategic objectives. So you've got to train your managers to do this, and it starts with in their head to how they define management. You got to get in there and make sure that they realize that their behaviors are important in their role as a leader in our organization. And the best companies I've worked with are very, very good at that. And the ones that scratch their head and wonder why people are leaving, they don't have no clue. They're not in the game in any way. So be explicit. And if you're a leader in this organization, you're expected to do these things. So again, pick anyone I've worked with. I've worked with Disney they were in my doctoral dissertation, worked with them for 15 years. It's leaders have a very clear knowledge of their role, and it's connecting employees even from day one to the mission of what we're doing. And they're an ambassador. They're not an employee. They're an ambassador of the organization. And we're we've got guests and we got cast member. You're now a cast member, and part of that means you're always on. People are always looking at you and what you're doing, so you got to pay attention to that. And my role as your leader is to make sure you have what you need. And that's important. You don't just say it. You've got to in my doctoral dissertation on why managers use or don't use recognition, I found the top reason why they don't is the people that report they don't know how to do it well. It's a blind spot. And this fuzzy notion of thanking people, and I feel self-conscious doing that. Do people really want it, et cetera, et cetera. No one gives it to me, and so they don't do it. And in the process, they are not using the most powerful tools available to them to create a relationship that has meaning and productivity for the organization in what they do with their people. So the
Two quick points on
managers key.
this.
Please go ahead.
2 quick points. One is, when I was at Gallup, one of the things that we used to talk in our training around the Q12 tool is that it's critical for managers to spend a minimum of 1 hour a quarter with their employees. Now, we would obviously like more than that. And people who say that, they can't do that, they probably have too many employees to manage. So at least 1 hour a quarter, if not more.
Yeah,
And
I'd say a one-on-one meeting weekly. And
yeah,
again, it's a high
ideally,
bar for
right?
some organizations. Yeah, ideally, yeah.
Ideally.
It's connecting with each person that works with you each week for 20 minutes and to check on how things are going. So, and then it becomes part of the ongoing expectation and relationship that you've got access to your manager.
The other thing I'd say is that, there's the attitude of too many managers, and I know you and I often really strongly preach against this. The whole idea that if I'm not telling you that you're doing anything wrong, assume everything's fine.
Yeah.
And that's the other thing.
That's not management, that's abdication.
Yeah, understanding that people need much more than just simply a paycheck in order to feel good about their job. And we have study after study that validates that.
Yes, so you got to be proactive on doing this and not reactive. If you're reactive, why didn't you tell me there was a problem? It's like, well, then you're reactive. You're always going to be dealing with problems. I'm talking about you got to be proactive in making this connection with your employees and systematically make this happen. And there's a lot of behaviors packed in there, and that's really our rest of the time is just running through some of those behaviors that we know are important to employees. The top of the list is thanking them when they do good work. Again, a common sense notion. 80% of managers think they're pretty good at this. Only 12% of employees say that they get recognition that's meaningful to them from their manager. So we got a knowing doing gap going on that most managers know. That, yeah, my people are important. Yeah, I read the 1 Minute Manager. Yeah, I got it. But then it's not having it up here, it's actually doing it in your behaviors. And so there's lots of ways to thank people for doing good work, and publicly, privately, notes, and you got to get in the game and make that happen. And part of your behavioral repertoire as a leader, that you're constantly doing this. Not every person every day, but every day someone. And then if you take that approach to it, then in the course of a week, you're going to get to probably all your employees. And so that's how you get to everybody, is that you as a leader are doing it a little bit every day, every conversation in the hallway, in a Zoom meeting, when you read good news in an email, you comment on it, you pass it on to the person's manager, whatever it may be. So that's where it all starts. In my research, this is almost universal. People want feedback. In fact, the younger generation, they can't operate in a vacuum. Without it, they're kind of lost. So they need that feedback. Tell me what I did right so I can do more of that. And it's almost universal. It doesn't mean that everyone wants the same way. Again, there's a lot of variance there, but everybody does need it. So even if you've got somebody that's more introverted or whatnot, they still need to feel valued. You're not gonna hug them and do a big flashy thing, but it could be a sincere thank you. It could be a written note. It could be telling them that you're doing a good job, and here's specifically why. So it's not generic. Here's a time's important. Timing is important. When you see good news, say something. See something, say something. Okay, and then in that, use the specifics of what they exactly did, and in the context of why that's so important. And if you want to leave a mark, get the level of feelings. Here's how it makes me feel. I'm proud. I was excited about your success on that project. I'm proud. Thanks for confirming that I hired you, that you're a good choice. I knew you would be. Whatever. There's a lot of variations that you can bring your own impact to that. But it
Hey,
starts
Bob,
with that.
I know that Michael has some questions for us, so we probably
Okay.
want to land the plane.
Okay. Well, then again, these are all behaviors. All have no cost. All are important in the relationship. So just to run through these really quickly, provide authentic two-way communication. 95% of employees say that's critical to them to do a good job. Asking employees for the input and ideas. What does that cost? You have any ideas for how we can save money, for how we can improve processes, improve service to customers? Well, 92% of employees want this. Okay, doesn't cost you anything to ask people who's got an idea on this problem. If they've got a good suggestion, giving them a time and support to pursue it. Okay. Again, involving them in decision making. In my research, 89% of employees say this is important to them. Even if you make the final decision, you could say, I know it would be a better decision if I have input from the group, especially those people are closer to this activity than I am. It's going to be showing trust and respect as all part of the manager's role in systematically connecting with their people, and helping them with career development. I touched on that before in different ways. Most development occurs in self-development. As an example, I'll skip that, but American Express is very good at this. Support them when they make a mistake. Is again common sense notion. Most employees, 94% of employees say they want this. They typically don't get it. Someone makes a mistake and it's amplified by their manager, and it makes them want to quit now. Guy's a jerk. But again, if you take the long-term view with the person and say, yes, you made a mistake. What'd you learn from that? Be and taking the long-term view of that relationship, it's going to serve you many times to come. As a person remembers how you handled that when they made a mistake they already knew that they made. So that's again, these behaviorally are all things that the leaders should be doing. All these things have no cost. They don't take a lot of time. They take a little focus, but it's mainly behavioral, and that's the main impact of saying you got to get in this game once you set up the baseline and the system of measurement. So with that, if you make that happen, then we'll turn to questions. You will create a culture of recognition, and this goes back to your research again, Rick, that if you get this going with the critical mass of your leaders, your employees will feel 5 times more likely to feel valued, 6 times more likely to endorse the company as a great place to work, 7 times more likely to stay with the company for their careers. This is the price of entry right here. 7 times more likely to stay with the company if you have a culture of recognition. And this is why we're so gung-ho about the importance of doing these simple things, and 11 times more likely to feel completely committed to their jobs. So with that, let's go to questions. Everyone that attended here gets a copy of one of my latest books on recognizing and engaging employees for dummies. And what are some of those questions that we got, Mike? You're muted.
Your enthusiasm is contagious. I'm sure everybody felt that, and I know you were rushed towards the end. So I think I firstly want to share with the audience, if some of this sort of level of excitement and engagement is something you'd like to participate in, obviously collect Bob Rick's contact information. But Doctors Nelson and Garlick and some WorkProud clients are putting together a small focus group to discuss some best practices around, the area of how do you bring these ideas to life, what are consequential and costs associated with those. Are there things that can be done internally with existing resources? So I'd encourage you to consider whether you wish to participate in some of those focus groups, which will be more of an open conversational format in Zoom meetings. The first ones will be held in March, and we will send out some information if those are some things that you'd like to attend. Certainly a great way to get some, knowledge and expertise and connectivity with Bob and Rick. So that's the first thing. Second, a few people have asked about, will we get copies of this slides out and information? Absolutely. People asked about copies of the study. Absolutely. Quite a few of them are already available on the workproud.com website. However, as a follow-up to at least those that attended or registered, we'll certainly be getting some materials out there for you. Final thing, in case we get pressed for time at the end, look out for the follow-up email that will come that will say thanks for attending and compliments of us, a copy of Dr. Bob's book with instructions on how to, redeem that into your address information. Probably give us to the end of the week and you'll see those.
It's a physical book, so we need an address to send it to.
So let's go to some of these questions. Thanks for those that were submitting the questions. And there is a QA channel down the bottom of your Zoom meeting. We'll see if we can get to all of them. If we don't get to all of them, again, I'd encourage strongly considering.
Or if any of these prompt another question, just put it in chat.
Sure. Or considering, connecting with Bob. And sorry, first question, no particular order. VP of Employee Experience of a big company asks, what are some ways organizations embed recognition and appreciation into their culture, into an ongoing basis? Internal approaches or other tools, and they seem to sort of fade out after a while. How do you bring it to life?
Well, first of all, you got to do those behaviors that we mentioned, and if there's any shortage of ideas, there's a wealth of that. I travel in real examples. For example, just in one of my books, 1501 Ways to Reward Employees, we've got a lot of all real life examples. 2/3 of the ideas in this book cost nothing. So again, for a lot of people, if you're ignorant of well, what's the richness of what can be done in here, there's a lot of data, a lot of examples, and you can open this book anywhere and find a usable idea. If that one doesn't work for you, turn the page. There's a wealth of information. This is a very rich concept in that standpoint. So getting in the game to begin with is critical, and then keeping it fresh and exciting. If you do the same thing over and over, we've got a technical term for that. It's called boring. So there's got to be a level of excitement, which means variety and freshness and connecting, doing things different. And the best companies, they loop employees into that conversation. again, they're not doing it to them. I've got, talked to one CEO and, well, we do something for the company and no one ever seems to like it. He does something he wants to do and they're dragging everyone else there. They don't want to come. And finally he got smart and he finally, after years, he said, I mean, find someone else that might be better at this. And he got a millennial to say, would you like to take this on? Absolutely. And he used social media tools to survey people and come up with ideas, find out their schedule, came back with a couple choices, and they did something they'd never done before. People absolutely loved it, So sometimes you're trying to push on a string by doing what you think you should do and have to do and what you've done where we worked before, when maybe just, again, starting with the people you have and what's of interest to them. How do they want to celebrate success and excellence? How do they want to be recognized when they do a good job? Come back to those things and don't do something from the 1940s that our company's done for 30 years that isn't having an impact. I think of things like years of service awards or birthday celebrations. And, you want to drive performance, not presence. Come on, if the things you're doing are just driving presence, you're going to end up with a culture of entitlement, not a culture of performance. This is powerful tools. If they're not used correctly, you're going to end up with random results. And so this is why it's so important to do these behaviors, but to track them and then align them with the objectives, strategic objectives and core values of the organization and projects we need done now for our competitiveness. So it's very relevant to the work of the organization. It's not, we're not saying these things are important, but we're just going to recognize people for this: years of service and birthdays and employee of the month, and you're not even in the game.
So very quickly, one of the reasons I think why recognition does not get embedded as part of the culture ongoing is because it's kind of haphazard, right? I mean, if it occurs to me to recognize an employee for doing something well, I do it.
If you're in a good mood and happen to have some time.
all those things, right? So what I was going to say is that I think it's really critical to always recognize employees around the culture and values of the organization. So in other words, everybody's got, a set of core values, or people should have a set of core values, and recognizing when people exhibit those core values, because those values are embedded in the culture. Now, if you can basically embed recognition around the values, then you've got it continuing on as part of the ongoing culture, rather than just being a haphazard activity as Bob describes.
Then you get haphazard results. If you, and there's a lot of this out there, and it's very frustrating because I find there's a lot of clutter in the systems, and organizations think they're doing the right thing because they've got a years of service program they've had for 40 years to give people something that, if they wanted it, they would have bought it already, or it just becomes sad and a joke. And I'd say I've worked with companies to kind of pause all that and then find out what's really would work for their employees. I've worked with companies that have stopped all that, but no matter how you get there, this has to be real. It has to be the real needs of your employees around the real work you need from them. Okay. And if you make that alignment, you get the results. I guarantee that. And so it's disheartening to me to see organizations that feel that they're all over this and they're not even in the game, and that's the game is the baseline, the measurement, the doing the things that people value, not just for being there, but for the performance that they've done and achieved individually, as part of the team, as part of the organization. That's the gold standard we're shooting for, wherever you're at, moving in that direction.
So a quick one for you, I think relevant to one of the recent studies we were working on and the client analysis, Rick, retaining employees who are moving for a small dollar change. Is this going to have an effect if you got to spend $100 as a etc. or $100 investing in some of these approaches? Where would one get a better return on investment and bigger impact?
Yeah, and I think that's a great question, and I think we've answered it in this webinar, that people, you would have to really typically offer people a lot of money to leave a job where they really, really enjoy the culture, where they're being consistently recognized. So it's fine to spend
They feel
money on,
valued.
it's fine to spend money on recognition activities. And this is something I know Bob has preached to me, and we agree on it. As long as that money is going toward things that are meaningful and not things that don't have any resonance with the people. Like, so for example, service anniversaries, birthdays, this sort of thing may not resonate. If you give something, if you give $50 for an employee to take their significant other out to lunch, then that has resonance. That's a good expenditure of money. And you have to find out what it is that resonates with the employee before you make that expenditure. So you're spending money wisely.
You're not spending money just to spend money
Right.
and feeling that you're doing the right thing. It's actually connecting with what your people most want.
All right, well, that brings us to the hour, and I know we wouldn't got to everything or the questions. We will do some follow-ups and appreciate everybody taking some time out of their day, and special thanks to Doctors Nelson and Garlick for giving us of their time and expertise and sharing their learning with us today. So thanks, everybody. Wish everybody a great rest of the week. All the best to you. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.